I knew if I went second, it would always be a bit of a hard act to follow because English is probably a bit more of a natural in front of the crowds, but hopefully I can still do this justice. So mine's going to focus on strength and conditioning, which is a fairly broad subject, but I'll talk around a few things. But if there are sort of questions or things that you think of at the time, so I'm not going to cover all this as such. I started delving into it and I realised that actually I was going to have too much content, and we're obviously trying to give something for everybody to a certain extent. Runners, distance runners, hopefully it'll complement some of the stuff that Ingy's already talked about, and I obviously did see on some of the slides, I think it was maybe the Ingebrigtsen slides or some of the Norwegian model stuff, and you might have seen on there was stuff on there about strengthening work for the feet, core, trunk stuff, general strength, and more specific strength on there as well, so we'll get onto that in a little bit. So, right, here we go. So, what is strength and conditioning? So, any training essentially that enhances the physical preparation for what you're training for. Usually, but not always, in this context at least, non-running activities, and that's what I'm going to focus on. But there is inevitably some crossover. So, for example, hill running, that kind of thing, is a strength-oriented activity. But we'll get to that later. As I say, I'll focus primarily on the sort of non-running activities. Now, for a lot of people, strength and conditioning can mean maybe a lot of different things, and there's probably a few, hopefully, myths or misconceptions, or maybe reasonings, maybe why if some people haven't included it. I'm not sure, which I'll get onto in a second. But I couldn't really sum this up well enough. I'm hoping that kind of just gives you a bit of a feel for it. But ultimately it's about movement, about physical preparation, usually some sort of resistance-based activity. There's things like plyometrics, which we'll get onto in a moment. But ultimately any kind of physical preparation that prepares you better for your activity. And we'll get onto the types of strength and things a little bit later. Now, a couple of things here on why you might want to include it, and also kind of generalise a bit here, but why people may not. You may have other reasons. But ultimately I sort of broke it down into three main categories about why it's useful. So we've got the performance side, and there's obviously lots of things that fall under each of these categories. But ultimately we're looking at improving your performance, increasing the work capacity and tolerate loads, so in other words, helping other areas of your training, and reducing the risk of injury. I kind of think those are the main three that, certainly when I first thought of it, that sprung straight to mind. People may have others, like I say, but those are the main three for me. And then I thought about why might people not want to, or may not already include, aspects of strength and conditioning within their training. So these are a few of the myths maybe that, again, may not apply to you, but perhaps maybe you've been concerned. So I don't want to get bigger, I'm a runner, I don't want to put on muscle mass, for example. It might slow me down, it might be advantageous for my running. I might use anything, I need specialist equipment or facilities to be able to do that. And I don't really know where to start and what to do. So, again, you may have others, but those are the kind of things I'm hoping that we might sort of dispel some of those concerns, or at least give you some information to go away with that, and roll with it a bit. So, how and why, I suppose, strength and conditioning might improve performance. So there's loads of different things. Don't worry if those things don't mean a lot to you, but it's kind of the key three things that stand at the top there. So improve force production into the ground. So in other words, as a runner, the more force you can apply into the ground, the faster you're going to run. And that actually applies across any event, okay? Whether it be a sprinter or an endurance athlete. There's obviously there's a little bit more specificity towards different types of event, but ultimately that stands true. Then you've got things like applying that force in the shortest possible time. So that's RFD, means rate force development, it's the fancy term. But ultimately, if you can apply X amount of force, but you can do it in the shortest amount of time, that's also going to enhance your performance. Things like your running mechanics, you can get the foot in place quicker and so on. And one of the biggest differences between sprinters and endurance athletes is actually the time they spend on the ground, for example. A world-class sprinter is only on the ground in a 100-metre race for somewhere between 8 and 10 hundredths of a second, whereas a world-class distance runner might be more like 12 to 15 hundredths, and that's probably the end of the race. And a recreational runner, I don't actually have any statistics on this, but I'm pretty certain they're going to be on the ground for a lot longer than the world-class sprinter. Now, there's also one other big factor of strength and conditioning, which there's lots of ways which this sort of directs towards improving this, but is running economy. So for those who don't know, I think, did you touch on running economy? I don't know if you did. But ultimately, the amount of oxygen that we use up and consume, okay, if you think of it like a fuel in a car, okay, if like you're using up lots of your fuel at a given running speed, you're not going to be as economical if you've got a car that's more economical, and S&C can assist with that. And then there's other little things where below here, so things like enhanced elastic leg stiffness, free energy. Okay, this is plyometrics. Okay, if you like, plyometrics, or this also known as the stretch shortening cycle. That's what the SSC is. That's when we make there's three types of muscle actions. Okay, you have an eccentric where the muscle lengthens. You have sort of an isometric, or working against inertia, and then you have concentric where the muscle shortens. And when that happens in very quick or rapid period of time, that's when the stretch shortening cycle happens. We do it with everything we do, but it's obviously more important when the faster you're running. You've got things like muscle fibre recruitment, so it doesn't necessarily mean getting bigger, but you are able to access more fibres in your muscle, if you like, so you better use more of it, more units within the muscle. Improved coordination, improved neural pathways, so that's like your brain to your muscles, if you like. Okay, you can make that more efficient and enhance nervous system, and you can improve your effectiveness. Okay, so things like force that we talked about, technique, and posture, which can be interchangeable in the sense of actually you can have a better running technique, but that might get generated by better posture, so how you carry yourself. That also might come from improving your technique through running drills, which is also a form of conditioning. Okay, so lots of ways in which that can be done and achieved. That's sort of a bit of an overview. And in terms of like the other things I mentioned at the start, is those three areas that I talked about: the improved performance, the improved work capacity, and the risk of injury being reduced. So those are the sort of things that fall under that. So in other words, if you're trying to improve your work capacity, you're trying to delay the onset of fatigue. Okay, so that's probably the biggest thing with the work capacity side of it, and the ability to endure for longer or tolerate bigger workloads. But that can also set up your training. So if you can endure bigger workloads, you can obviously increase your training load. Actually, one of the best analogies that I really like on that front is if you think about the stuff that Ingi said. So we're talking about the engine of the body, so a bit like a car. Okay, so if you've got an engine, if you're developing the engine through training those aerobic systems, anaerobic systems, then the strength work is like building a stronger chassis. In other words, if you've got a pretty weak chassis and you try and develop that big engine, which people do, they don't condition themselves, but they develop the engine, okay, and then invariably there's going to be a breakdown. So if you think of S&C as like your framework, your strengthening of the chassis, and the aerobic conditioning, okay, and the anaerobic conditioning, those sort of things about developing the engine of the car, those two done together, you've got a good engine there. Sorry, a good vehicle there rather. And then you've got the reduced risk of injury. Now all these things are interchangeable, okay, but effective movement, addressing weaknesses, because if you've got a weakness, the body is like a chain of movement, everything works together, okay, as a knock-on effect with each other. If you've got a weakness somewhere, there'll be a knock-on along the chain, which means that you're actually more likely reliant to load elsewhere in the body, and that's when overuse injuries can occur. From a sort of lack of conditioning perspective, at least, injuries can occur for a host of other reasons. You might overtrain and you might do other things, but from a lack of strength and conditioning perspective, if we can address some of those weaknesses along the chain of movement, then we're better, more robust, if you like, to be able to cope with demands of running and training loads, and things like improved coordination, efficiency, and whatnot as well also play a part in injury risk too. So there's a few studies. I'll flip through these quite quickly. There is obviously I can tell you some of those things, but don't take my word for it. There has been plenty of research done on it, on the effects of strength training. And I started with this one because actually there's a lot of reference to some of the stuff that that I do with strength and conditioning with club runners and recreational runners alike, that I've used the concepts for within actually some of the stuff that a guy called Richard Bladgrave is an advocate of, and is actually really used to do some reading material. Strength and Conditioning for Endurance Runners by Richard Bladgrave is an excellent book if you're into this sort of thing. But the long and short of it is some of the research they did a systematic review, so they looked through loads of different studies to do with strength and conditioning, and that's with middle and long distance athletes. And there was really good evidence that strength improved running economy. And running economy, if you remember saying before about the oxygen consumption, okay? So in other words, they're more economical as a result of doing strength and conditioning work. Importantly for distance runners, going back to one of those sort of misconceptions, if you like, of doing strength work or gym work, that body composition was not negatively impacted. In other words, they didn't get bigger and bulk up, if you like, there were some performance improvements as well from that. So in addition to 2 to 3 strength sessions per week, which include a variety of strength training modalities, which we'll get onto later, that was likely to provide benefit to their performance. Okay. The other two, there was, I'll a little bit more briefly, but this one here was not a systematic review. 5 studies. 2 of the 5 measured a 2.9% improvement in their running performance over 3 and 5K in producing strength work. And all 5 of those studies had a 4.6 average improvement in their running economy. But it ranged from 3 to 8%, so some people responded better than others. And there's always going to be individual aspects to this. But the fact that all 5 had an average of running economy improvement of 4.6%, I think is pretty significant. I think I have one more on there, which is talking about the injury prevention side. This one was like a massive systematic review. So this reviewed 25 different studies or trials, if you like, which had 26,000 athletes, participants, sorry. So this was not done on elites, but there appeared no benefit to stretching in the studies, okay, but there was multiple exposures in terms of the strength and proprioceptum, which is another training tool, if you like, a training modality, showed a tendency towards increasing effectiveness. And the most important thing, probably there, strength training reduced sports injuries to less than a third. So, those are the study bits. So, where to start when it comes to strength and conditioning with runners? So, I'll talk a little bit about this, about just necessarily how I've done it. Not all of that necessarily will be how others do it, but as I say, I relate this more to endurance athletes and from previous experiences. But we're collecting information first, mainly because we want to know if there's any injury history, okay, experience levels of the athlete, the runner, stages of development. And you touched upon the differences, of course, with young athletes and older athletes, but actually strength is a consistent component, important, should I say, component all the way through life, if you like. We lose strength quite significantly as we get a bit older, but also as a child or as a young or developing athlete, not until we're sort of post-peak height velocity, basically it's post-puberty, that we can really develop that significantly, but actually really important a really important component to form the basis of your training. We'll talk about sort of a little pyramid a bit later on about how it can form the foundations to things too. Anyway, sorry, I'm sidetracking, but in terms of the sort of things that we then do, so movement screen. So a movement screen is something where we look at how someone is moving. It's not about fatigue, it's just about how someone moves. And there'll be movement assessments, and I'll show those up in a moment. Well, actually, I haven't got a visual. I might even get a few if we've got any willing volunteers, we might get you to come up and I can talk while someone does something. But now you've all had a drink, everyone will be game, surely. So yeah, we look at the movement screen first, like how someone moves and what that might tell us. Okay, so if someone does something or moves in a certain way, it might then lead us on to test something else to find out why that's happening. So if someone doesn't squat properly, for example, sometimes people can't squat and get the depth to something. It might just be that they haven't learnt the skill of it correctly first, but it might also be they have some tightness in their hamstrings or their ankles are tight, and ankle mobility with runners is a very pivotal thing, because you can't squat. You also then load differently if your ankles are tight. So it can branch off. But then if we've got someone that moves pretty well, functions pretty well, and there's nothing there that we need to sort of think, oh, okay, that's a red flag, we need to address that. We then start to look at, we will look at this anyway, but we look at some strength capacity. So in other words, what can people do? Certain type of strength exercises using their body weight, and that gives me a bit of a marker of where they are. Okay, are they poor? Are they okay? Or are they really good with these types of exercises? Because if they're then that's all right, or that's pretty good, we can move them on to more loaded based exercises. You wouldn't load a squat, for example, if you can't perform a body weight squat correctly first, or at least you're not with very much weight. You might be sometimes with a light weight, you can get into a better depth because you can sort of balance a little bit better and whatnot. But ultimately, if you can't function those basic movements, those fundamental movements, squatting and lunging and a few other bits and pieces, then loading that exercise with weight is not necessary. Okay, you can improve your performance if you like, or your robustness, or you're less likely to pick up injuries just by improving your function. So then so I say movements, then strength capacities, and then we might look at some other qualities. So things like reactive strength, explosive strength, and max strength, which is a little bit further down the line. A lot of people might not even get to some of that sort of stuff, but actually there's also some qualities there that you might do that you don't realise that you're doing in some of the running activities that you do. So, okay. So, what sort of things are we looking at? I sort of touched upon it a bit there, but from a runner's perspective, there are a few key things. Things like what's happening at the feet, the ankles, the knees, and the hip in particular are really quite crucial. Okay. All our loading is going obviously make contact with the floor. Of course the upper body is important too, but there's quite a few key things there. Touch upon that again in a minute. But are those movements stable and controlled? Is there full range of motion in some of those exercises or those movement screens? Okay. And is there sufficient strength and strength capacity to then move on? I alluded to it before. So if there isn't strength capacity there, then we might work on strength capacity. And strength capacity is the ability to perform a certain amount of work, if you like, with your body weight before we then move on to loaded exercises. And if there's something that doesn't seem quite right, if there is a red flag come up there, then we look to address that. Okay. Like I touched upon the squatting and the ankles. So I had someone the other day, for example, no names, but they went to squat and they couldn't do it very well. And when we tested their ankle range of motion, it was next to nothing in terms of. So the way we'll do it was like knee to wall test. You might not all see this, but if that was the wall here, I got them to see how far they could keep their heel down and have their foot away from the wall and still touch their knee to the wall. Most athletes should be able to get between sort of 10 and 12 centimetres as a good level. Most people are a little bit below that if they need to work on it. Some people are I've had a couple of people that are really mobile and get almost like half a foot away from the wall, still touch their knee to the wall and their ankle doesn't come off. Really good at it, but hypermobile almost. Okay, this person scored 1 centimetre away from the wall. Okay, they were really tight in their ankles, and we were able to just do some mobility work, and their ankle range straight away improved. And as I say, if there are any red flags, we look to address that, which we just talked about. So, like runners, there's a few. This is not a comprehensive list, okay, but these are kind of 5 things that are probably the key or sort of more highlighted or considerations to consider as a runner. Okay, what's happening with your feet? Have you got flat feet? Have you got high arches? Have you got flat feet? You know, most people probably know this, but may not. When we run, we pronate. So you've probably heard the term pronation. Some probably think, oh, it's a bad thing, isn't it? But actually, it's a natural thing for it to happen. We land on the outside of our foot rolls in. That's how we dissipate force for our foot. Okay, and further up the chain. But if we've got flat feet, we may collapse. If we've got high arches and not enough control, we may also collapse, but also we're going to load differently. So that's a factor. The calf muscles in the lower limb. Soleus, that's a deep muscle below. You probably think of our calf here. The calf is made up of 3 muscles. You've got the gastroc, which is your main one on the outside here, and you've got a deeper one, soleus. That's usually quite weak in people, but it's when we make contact with the floor there on that foot. If everyone ever run on the track and then run on the track for a while, you'll find that muscle when you put a pair of spikes on for the first time in a while, and you feel a bit sore the next day. So those areas need to be strong. And also, as we talked about, the ankle mobility needs to be pretty good too. So if you've got tight calves, that might be a restricting factor too. Hip extension, so that's the extension of our hip here. When we run, okay, we're making that motion. If that pattern's pretty weak, if our glutes, that's our muscles on our backside and our hamstrings, if they're not very strong and we're weak in that pattern, then you're leaving something quite significant off the table there. So that's an area to consider. Glute medius, side of the hip. This is what controls our leg at the hip when we make contact with the ground. If you've ever seen someone run and their hips drop a lot here, they're probably weak here, okay? So building up the capacity of that area, the strength there and stability there is also critical. And trunk stability, so if you think about our pelvis, having our strong and stable pelvis, so we're efficient when we run, there's not wasted energy, wasted movement, or a risk of overuse injuries because we've got poor control through that, and that's done in a few different planes of movement, and I'll get to that a bit further along as well. Of course, that's not an extensive list. There's plenty of other things, but those highlight probably some of the key things. So in terms of the movement screen that I've done with people, that's not, again, this isn't a full list, but we talked about ankles, talked about the third one down, the squat movement, inline lunge, so lunging movement. These are all kind of fundamental movements that we should all be able to do and make, okay? But we can assess them as well. So I'm wondering, to make this a little bit more interactive, so that I thought, first of all, the movement screen, I think I alluded to it earlier, it's not necessarily about fatigue, so how I would do this with people is we would score it. So if you take any one of those movements, so the squat is a really good one, because it's just, everyone knows a squat, squatting down through here onto a chair or whatever, you do that as functional day-to-day activity. But it also, like I said, can lead into other things if we find someone that's weak in that movement. But we're not doing that to fatigue. What we're looking for is how someone moves. So I'll have like 5 key points that I'm looking for. It might be how low they're getting when they squat. Are their heels staying on the ground when they do it? And if they're not, maybe it's those ankles are tight. Can they control their upper body, or are they leaning right forward here? And they might not have the trunk stability or the strength in their hips. And so it leads on to other things. And then we've got the strength tests. So we've got the single leg glute ham lift. So this is where you lift your hip up with your foot, normally raised on something. You can do it off of the floor. And a whole host of bracing exercises. These are the trunk exercises, so things like side bridges, front planks, and lower abdominal exercises. So we can find where people are weak and strong in, and I've got kind of general averages across the course of what I know to be okay or what needs more work. I've taken some of that from the Richard Bladgrove book actually, which is very useful. But now having done it with, I've had the pleasure of being able to work with a whole host of people. So we've got like our local athletes at the sort of front end on the women's side, particularly like sort of Sarah and Jenny and people like that. And we've done all these sort of tests with people year on year and seen a steady improvement on all of those scores. But I've also had the chance to work with people who haven't touched on S&C or haven't done it for some time and new to running, and they tend to score lower, as you'd imagine, because they haven't got those sort of baseline strength levels. But it's also then highlight something that you can highlight to them people where you're a little bit weaker in and what you need to prioritise on. So there's a couple of people in the room I think have done some of that stuff. So and there's also like we do some full body stuff and upper body things, and we do like a calf test as well. So we can test the capacity of that lower limb. Okay, how many you can do. So with the things like the calf and the glute bridge, these are movement tests. These are done to fatigue. So you have to maintain a certain range of motion and tempo. So control to the exercise. So not come up, drop to the floor. You've got to control it up and you've got to control it down. We do it on single leg, by the way. And then we can also see if there's limb discrepancy. So if your left side and your right side, if there's any imbalance, if you like. So I did actually talk about a bit of participation, didn't I? So is anyone up for coming out and doing something in front? Or do I have to pick on someone? Yeah. Or do I have to pick on someone?
I'll do it.
Go on, Dan. Oh yeah, well, you all right? Yeah, how you're okay with yourself? Yeah,
I'll see you
You
alive.
can show us the imbalance of the dodgy ankle.
Round of applause for our gorgeous assistant. Okay, what do you want me to do?
So let's stick with the squat because we talked about that a little bit. So if you come into the middle, Dan, so they can see you from the side.
So I need to go.
Yeah, we're gonna look at him from the side and we're looking at him from the front and the back, all right? So what we're going to do is you're just going to do a squat for me, okay? It doesn't mean weight it down, it's not resistance, so yeah, thank you. Okay, right, so let's have a look at him squat.
I'm really nervous.
See, and if you spot something, then feel free to kind of point something out. So go for it now.
I've got jeans on, it's really difficult.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, you should kind of loose fitting clothing down.
I'll take these off.
Cool. That's actually pretty good.
Thank you. Dodge your ankle.
So, he's keeping his heels down.
Thank you.
Okay, he's got good depth to his squat, so he's got to sort of parallel or below, so that's pretty good.
I've been told I've got good depth.
But one thing he does do, you see his knees come forward here. So his knees go beyond his toes, they're not too far forward, it's alright. Actually, one of the things that, in fact, I'm going to borrow the brolly. I was going to bring the dowel out from the gym. This isn't doing anything untoward, but it's just to see.
It's that depth we're talking about.
So if you go down, and just pause at the bottom for me. So the one thing that you see a lot, you see the shin angle here, okay, and the torso angle there. That's actually really good. Not many people can do it. Cool. Can you just do it facing the audience now if you're not too
No.
you're not too sore?
This is the most exercise I've done in ages.
Well, yeah, you got a workout from this.
Thank you. Free.
Yeah. So when we look at from the front or from the back, we're looking for alignment. So through feet, knees, and hip, for example. Okay, and if his knees falling, they do go in a little bit here. So that might be a bit of a weakness up here. It might just be but it could be. Sometimes there are structural things that we can't change. A lot of people do have a little bit of it, so Dan, you can rest for a minute. Thank you. Sorry. But actually, yeah, you can sit down now. That was actually pretty good squat. I think it was a round of applause for Dan. I was kind of hoping that you might have had a few more flaws, because there were a few things, like he did display his feet a little bit, but yeah, he's got his ankle issue, so it's probably something that's highlighted there, the way his feet were tracking.
Yeah.
But obviously we would have screened him first, so we would know that his ankle was hurt, so we could then think, well, okay, is that a factor? And it's important to know that. But we're not going to do all of these things, we'll leave it probably at that for the moment. But like I said, if we'd had someone that maybe couldn't quite squat through there, we might think, oh, okay, look, why is that? And then we might do some of the strength tests and find out they're a bit weak in that glute hamstring pattern, and we think, oh, okay, well, he's weak in that and he does that. So then two bits of information linked together give us a bit more of a sort of fuller picture of what's going on with them. Now, this is a little bit more advanced. So I put this in because I knew I was trying to cater for not just, a wide spectrum of audience. So I'm hoping we have got, in fact, some Guernsey athletes here. So this is the sort of thing that certainly they would touch on, but there's also some benefit for everyone to be able to touch upon some of these qualities and eventually get to these. So there's lots of different qualities of strength, and I will show you a diagram a bit later that might help you get a bit of an idea of where they fall on this sort of continuum, which that's the next slide. So we've got maximum strength. So we talked about strength capacity before, so that's kind of a more enduring or endurance-based form or general form of strength. Okay, but maximum strength is the most amount of force, maximum amount of force we can apply. Okay, in the movement, and there's ways of testing that, but it's a bit more advanced because if we can't do something with good form, we don't want to then do it to maximum or to a really heavy load. Okay. But the next two, most people won't realise, but you will touch upon aspects of this most likely in the training that you do if you do drills, for example. Okay, things like reactive strength is how quick. That's the thing I talked about earlier on, the plyometric or the stretch shortening cycle, where something happens quite quick. So we do it when we jump, but we actually do it when we run. We do it in every movement, but we do something fast. We're utilising that. Some people might not have great reactive strength. Okay, so, and the way, it's a hard thing to test. You can see it to the eye sometimes. If someone spends a long time on the ground when they're running, they probably don't have great reactive strength. If when they do a jump, there's a long time between that going down and coming up, then there's probably an aspect to there that they're not also applying that. When they step off something and jump, a thing called a drop jump, for example, which we use in the gym, which is a little bit more advanced plyometric, if they're on the ground for a long time, their reactive strength isn't good. So we've got a jump mat. I shouldn't make brought it up actually, but we have a jump mat.
You've broken it.
Oh, is that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry.
I was using it earlier. John Luke will back me up.
Okay. Good job I didn't bring it out now because I wouldn't be able to, would it? So ultimately the jump mat can measure a couple of things. It can measure ground contact time. So if we were to step on it and then jump off, it would measure how long we were on the ground for to create that jump. So we went back earlier, it's about how quickly we can express force. That's an area where we can look at to improve upon that. But if you know how long someone's on the ground and how high they jump and divide one by the other, you get something called the RSI, Reactive Strength Index, okay? Which might sound fancy, but it gives us a really good idea of what their reactive strength is like. If you divide one, you do it as a decimal, so like if you're on the ground for say 0.2 of a second, so 0.2, and you jump 50 centimetres, so 0.5, and divide one by the other, you get a reactive strength index of 2.5, which is pretty good, okay? If you can get to 2.5, 3, that's pretty good. If you've got someone who's less than 1.5, then their reactive strength is poor. So if you're an athlete, just be trying to, or any athlete, and you can improve upon that, then your reactive strength qualities are going to help and transfer into your running. And you've got explosive strength. So that's a measure of sort of relative leg power, if you like. Okay. But also there's different ways of training that. We test it with, you can test it simply with a standing long jump. How far you can do a standing long jump. A little bit more of a skill to that. So we sometimes use the jump mat again, where you do a standing jump and just measure how high you jump, how high your hips are going off the floor. Okay, and that gives us an idea of that explosive strength. And there's different ways we can train that with light weights and whatnot, trying to move force and express force really quickly. So talked about lots of different types of strength. This is one way of like maybe just sort of summarising a big portion of it. There are things that fall outside of that, but the main qualities that I've talked about so far, most of them appear on there. So in other words, if you're trying to express the maximum amount of force, you're actually, you do that over a longer period of time. So you've got force here on the left and velocity, which is if you give it a speed or how quickly you do it. Okay. So to create maximum amount of force, it's not going to be done very quickly. It's normally, so if you think about lifting up a really heavy weight, you're struggling with it, you're applying a lot of force, okay, but it's taking you a longer amount of time to do it than say when you're sprinting or throwing like a light object, where you're doing it really quite fast, okay, but you're not expressing as much force to do that, okay, and that's sort of this curve, force velocity curve it's called, okay, and different types of exercise. So max strength, you think of like a squat or a deadlift, where you're doing a few repetitions of, okay, max strength that occurs at the far left, and sprinting happens at the far right, okay, along with plyometrics as well, which happen in a short period of time, or ideally will happen in a short period of time. Now, I think I mentioned it earlier, but there's lots of different types of strength, but I talked about how the strength components sort of fit in to a sort of underpinning model, if you like. This is actually a coaching model. It's for middle distance athletes, but taken from the endurance model course for endurance. And it's worked on it's content that's taken from a guy called Untitled Chapter, who's a Ukrainian thrower, but he's renowned for this sort of model, if you like, of how you classify exercises. Okay, there's the different colours represent the different types of things. I won't get too much into that, but ultimately, the nearer the bottom, it's a very more general activity that's not as closely related to what you're training for. So the top is your event, if you like. So whether you're a middle distance runner or indeed a marathon runner, the bit at the top is stuff that's very closely related to your event. Things like running at the race pace, if you like. But in terms of the strength side of it, a lot of the qualities actually happen in a very general sense, because they don't. If you think you're a fitness endurance athlete, you don't. If you're doing an event like the marathon or even the 5,000, okay, when you do, there's a squat. The squat doesn't replicate the movement of that, so it's not specific in terms of movement. And if you're doing it quite quickly, like a squat jump, for example, then it's also not the same energy system. And you talked about energy systems before. You sort of talked about aerobic and anaerobic. You've also got this sort of chemical energy where things that happen anything explosive or fast, you kind of utilise that for that. So by sort of default, most strength-orientated activities are quite general or fundamental, if you like. They sort of underpin the other things that we do further up the pyramid, okay? But they form the basis. So there's all types of strength. You've got general strength, maximum strength, special strength. Don't get too bogged down by that, but ultimately what we're talking about is different aspects of strength that underpin further up, and they can assist with your training. So, in terms of basic recommendations, what a strength session might look like. For you guys, most of it's going to probably stem around improving movement and improving that strength capacity that we talked about those exercises before. We didn't touch on the exercise too much, but ultimately strength capacity based exercises, and I'll show you a chart of exercises in a moment which some of that cross over into. It doesn't need to, you don't need a lot of facilities. You don't need to have any specialist equipment. Maybe with the jump side and things, yeah, okay, but you could still do that. You could do a standing long jump, you can do sort of things. But we're looking at something like, ideally, I'd say a minimum of 1 to 2 times a week, doing some sort of strength qualities. But I'll put 2 to 3, but ultimately you might actually be doing some already. So I don't know, actually if I go back, how do I go back in music? We'll just do that. On here, if you look on the far right, running drills on the right hand side. So you've got these strength qualities in here. Okay, strength endurance, general strength, specific strength. So without worrying about what those might be, running drills tick some of those boxes. So some of those running drills that you might do as part of your warm up, or your other outside training sessions, will tick some of those boxes. But in terms of the main strength session, we're looking at maybe a couple of times a week, 4 to 8 exercises, so different exercises, where you might do 2 to 4 sets of that same exercise, for example. And it would hopefully, across those 2 sessions, or at least across the course of the week or 2, would include those fundamental movement patterns. So those are the 7 main fundamental movement patterns that we all make in everyday life, but also as part of our training. So be a squat, okay, a lunge, a hinge, where we're pivoting from here, a push or a pull, or we brace. So you think about core exercises or trunk exercises, side bridges, planks, which some of you might know or heard of. And there's also rotation, of course, as well. Now, sometimes we'll do some of those together. They're a bit more complex, but those are the 7 fundamental movements. So if you're doing a training session for strength, and you've got 4 to 6 exercises, and you're doing it once or twice a week, you would try and essentially cover off most of that within those movements. Within that session, covering those movements. Depending on what you're training, might depend on the reps and sets that's appropriate. Again, it depends what you're trying to train. So this is a little quick strength matrix thing. That it's this is sort of what I do, but there's stuff within that. But the main things, if you're coming into it, someone who hasn't done any work before in the gym, we're trying to build that strength and work capacity near the top, and you probably look at higher repetitions or sets. It'll be in those top 2, should I say, sorry, general strength, and you've got trunk exercises within that as well. Okay. So you've got the number of reps, the number of sets you might do of an exercise. The TUT just means time under tension. Okay, so if we're doing a set of, let's say, 8, I'll stick with squats because we've kept that as a theme. We've talked about that movement a lot. Or I have, sorry. But you're going to be squatting. Okay, you might make a movement 8 times. Okay, but the work that you might do might take you somewhere between 30 and 40, 50 seconds perhaps. Okay. One thing I haven't, and I did miss off my slides, was that depending on what you're training, might depend on the execution of movement. So what I mean by that is, remember I said about the reactive strength, explosive strength. So they're, by virtue of the name of it, they happen fast. Okay. Whereas these things happen with more control and execution, and that's because you're trying to recruit more muscle fibers and get a little bit stronger, if you like. Okay. So you might do that at a more controlled and slow tempo. So if you're squatting, to develop strength in your glutes and the rest of your legs, okay, where it might go down at more like a 2 or 3 second, okay, so that eccentric, that's the lowering, so our muscles working slowly, lengthening under tension, that brings more muscle soreness, okay, eccentric muscle action brings more muscle soreness, but you're also recruiting more fibers. So we might try and build up the strength of those muscle groups first, before we move on to some of the more advanced things, where we do things like jumping and more explosive movements. That Chin Angle is a really basic, but so there's those movement patterns, okay, and sort of crossover with some bits. All right. So we've got the pattern on the left hand side, like a squat, or a lunge, or a split stance, a hinge, a push, a pull. I've broken the trunk stuff down to a couple of ways. So we've got like the side or anti-rotation. Anti-rotation is when we're just holding something here. It's trying to pull us that way, and we're bracing. So they're really good from a running transfer because as a runner, we're efficient. Obviously, trying to work in this plane that we move in, and holding something against a resistance. You're trying to hold yourself in that position, that posture, if you like. Then we've got trunk, pelvic. So this is like core exercises for keeping your pelvis really stable. Have you ever seen someone run and they lean forward a lot? Okay. Chances are they've got this sort of pelvic anterior tilt. Okay, so either weak lower abdominals, maybe tight hip flexors. Okay, these sort of things can help control the pelvis, get you into that sort of position that we want to then transfer into our running. So if our pelvis isn't leant forward, we're not going to then be leant forward ourselves, and even if we're not, we might then sort of have a lot, everything happening at the back. So we're trying to pull everything up from the front so that we've got a more upright posture. And then there's things like rotary and hip stability as well. So I put it into like beginner, intermediate. So there is hundreds of exercises that you could do, okay? But if you're a beginner, you might focus on some of the things on the left and then work towards stuff over towards the right, okay? It works on a basis that it's simple to more complex, okay? Generally bilateral to unilateral just means 2 feet to 1 foot. If we work towards doing something on 1 foot, if you think about running, we're landing on that 1 foot, so we want good control, we don't want wasted movement. Okay, so if we can be better doing things unilaterally with single leg, then that's obviously going to transfer better over to our running. Okay, someone might be able to do a good squat, okay, but I'm guessing if I got him on one leg and got him to do the same thing, there would be a lot less control there. It's a little bit more challenging, so it's essentially more unstable exercise, okay? So they go from simple to more complex, more difficult if you like, both legs to one leg, stable to more unstable. And there's progressions. So you might not know what some of these are, but if you still get, I don't know if the slides will go out, but people can pick them up. Those are the description of the exercise. You'll find that quite easily on most good YouTubes. So, how might this fit in though, doing some strength work into your week? So this is not necessarily how everyone should do it. This is just an example about some people who do it. Okay. So this is based on someone who might run 5-6 times a week. Okay. You might be running less, but doesn't mean you can still fit in 2 or 3 strength components. So I'm just taking this is more an example of someone in the club scene, okay? In that Tuesday they might have a track session, all right, or some tempo or some hills or whatever, okay? But in their warm-up, they're going to do some mobility and activation and running drills, okay? So that's going to enhance their general physical preparation, okay? So it is a form of conditioning. But on these other days, perhaps that's Wednesday, they might do their main strength conditioning session. Monday is actually the day that I see a lot of the club people, the endurance athletes. So we do our main strength session on a Monday, and then we do some other stuff sometimes on a Thursday, or Wednesday or Friday, depending on when they can fit it in. But it doesn't need to take that long. I mean, the session I do with the club people, we're well over an hour, but we're covering all of those components in one session, okay? We're doing stuff for reactive strength, explosive strength, maximum strength, sometimes strength capacity and trunk work and core work. But other people could do parts, you could break that up. You could do some of that on one day, your core stuff on a different day. You know, you're getting running drills, activation stuff, it's part of your gym session, you're part of your track session on Tuesday. And there's also things like mobility that come into play as well. So we do hurdle drills, for example, walking over and balancing that. There's some stability-based stuff in there as well. So lots of different components, and you can fit that in lots of different ways. It doesn't have to be in a gym environment. And most of the exercises that I've listed, for example, barring a few, check that, make sure that is the case. But yeah, most of those there, other than maybe a Swiss ball and some light weights if you start to add a bit of resistance to it, okay? There is a TRX exercise in there on the far right, but that's more in the advanced column there, a bit further down the line. But ultimately, most of this other stuff there, you're doing with body weight and light weight. So you don't need to be in a gym. You can do that at home. Just need an exercise, maybe an exercise mat, bit of space, and yeah, good structure to the session.
Pack of flour.
Like a flower. Yeah, everything you could wait. Be improvisable. I know people. We did. So in lockdown, we did some online gym sessions, and people didn't have much equipment. So there were people literally getting a bag, filling their bag with tins, okay, and they might put it on their front, and they would then do their squats with their front there, or a split squat with their bag on their back, and they because they had no weight to it. They needed some stimulus. They needed some extra resistance because body weight wasn't going to be enough for them to create that stimulus. So they improvised, and that worked well. Small children work quite well as well. So I'm conscious I've kind of flown through, and I do tend to talk fast as well, so apologies if I skirted over things or gone too much in depth. I don't know if you've got questions in a moment, now will be a good chance. But so I'm hoping that you've seen the benefits of where you can enhance performance in lots of different ways. And a bit of an idea of what work capacity and those tolerance to load are, but the benefits of it from an injury perspective. So strengthening up what I call maybe like auxiliary strength. So things like, that's like usually like the glute med, things like for the ankles and the feet. They don't sort of fall into the box of that curve I showed you. They're sort of more the auxiliary or extra, sometimes called special strength actually, I think sometimes, but alongside the explosive stuff. But it doesn't fall on that curve, but it, from a runner and stability point of view, is pretty critical to enhancing your general stability and aiding injury prevention. You're not going to bulk up. Lots of studies are showing that. I used to do quite a bit of work in the gym and I'm still pretty skinny, so probably a good advert on that front. But ultimately, yeah, you're doing so much other work and other training that the energy output, if you like, if you look at the stuff that Ingy was showing you, those guys are running so much volume, and it's all relative. Like, you know, we've got local athletes that are running between sort of 40 and 100 miles a week. So then develop muscle size is pretty hard to do when the energy output is going towards recovering and adapting from other things. But you're still recruiting and strengthening up without that bulk coming. So it doesn't have to be that time consuming, so you can break it into chunks. I usually work on the basis of sort of 6 to 8 exercises in a session, but it could be 4. It could be 4 exercises. You could do your squat, your push, and a couple of core bits, for example, on one day. Another day it could be a lunge, a pull, and then some other core stuff. And it might only take you 20 minutes. You could do it. You could have gone it. You could be before or after a run. Doesn't really matter too much. If it's a hard workout, you probably don't want to do the strength session before it, but if it's just an easy run, it shouldn't take too much out of the tank, and if you're doing your runs nice and slow, it's not going to leave you too fatigued, so you can still get your strength quality in, okay? And doesn't take that long. You don't need that much equipment to start with. Most people here won't need to, definitely. It's there's a few things further down the line, you start to explore different types of strength qualities, but you can do it from home. Like I said, go on exercise mat, a few light weights and medicine ball or whatever. There's plenty you can do. So I kind of think there's not really anything to lose, or to gain, except muscle mass, obviously. Yeah, that's me. But if you've got questions, I'm kind of conscious that some of it's probably gone over people's heads, and other things are probably like, well, that's pretty basic. But if you've got individual things that you want to ask, then please fire away. Oh,
Toby,
go on then, Toby.
I was just going to say, do you think it's important to kind of place the sessions in the right places in your week, training week, around your actual kind of sessions, key sessions? Because is there a danger that if you put a gym session or do one too hard in the wrong place, then you'll actually be too fatigued to get the maximum out of a key session?
Yeah, no, good question. I think once you get into the habit of making strength part of your routine, it's going to be less of and you get the balance of how much you do. But obviously, like if it's the first time you've done it, and you go and do 3 sets of 8 exercises, and you really load it up, you're going to be pretty sore. You've got to make sure it's appropriate, okay? But I think the most important thing is you get it in, okay? And there's only a certain time and days or slots you've got to get it in, you do it then. if it compromises things in the short term, so like you might just be a little bit sore the next day when you go and do your running session. There's actually some research that suggests that the soreness doesn't actually inhibit performance. It might feel like it does, and you might feel a little bit tired. But you shouldn't always feel like that after a strength. So sometimes you might feel a bit more sore than others when you introduce something new, for example, a new stimulus. It's going to leave you maybe a little bit more sore. But then once you're not going to be changing it every time. You might change the load and adapt some bits to it. But I think the first and foremost, get it in when you can. So if there's any time you can do it, you just do it then. And if your track sessions, dare I say it, suffer a tiny little bit in the short term, I think the long-term benefit outweighs the short-term negative gains, but most negative aspects. But half the time, it's more just like you feel a little bit tired and a bit sore, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't still run a good session, for example. Yeah, is that answer?
Yeah, thanks.
Tom, intrigued now.
Don't put up too much. No, it's a bit of two parts. So firstly, if an athlete really prioritises their mileage and cannot fit in both, then would you advise an athlete to what sessions could be lost for a S&C session, or would you advocate ever losing running sessions for S&C sessions?
Okay, so if you're not doing any S&C and you think, oh no, I normally do a run, I only have time for a run that day, then you're not doing it, you're leaving something off the table. So whilst you might get some benefit for the running at some stage, I think the negatives are more counterproductive, if you like. So I would sacrifice a running session for a gym session if you had to choose. I'm hoping that most people won't need to choose, because you can fit in, if it needs to, if it's someone really busy and they've got a lot to get in and you're only running a certain amount of time, you think, oh, do I fit in 20 minutes? Then you might have to lose a running session. But if you've got someone that's trying to do high mileage, I would still, most of the time when you introduce a volume, and I think you can back me up on this, you're gonna, if you're changing one component, so you're increasing your volume, you're probably not doing lots of hard sessions as well in that time. So you might increase your volume, but then I would still keep in quality gym work, or some gym work of some description, to maintain the strength qualities alongside building your volume. Going back to that analogy of you're building the engine, but you're also building the chassis at the same time. So don't neglect one or the other, sort of thing. Yeah. Sorry, is that?
Makes sense, yeah. I thought that's kind of what you said. I don't know what you're going to say if this is a genuine question, I guess. Yeah. So we had the half marathon not so long ago. Yeah. I wondered if you would prioritise the S&C sessions differently for someone who's targeting maybe the half marathon compared to someone who's targeting the 1500, for example. Would you prioritise it differently, and how much differently, if so?
Yeah, so, I don't know if I answered the question the way you think. So there's two things. In the lead up to a race, you might obviously reduce what you're doing of anything. So in the taper, you're not going to be doing lots of big strength work, but you might keep some qualities in. But that strength for a 1500 metre runner, or any runner, there is some prerequisites or underpinning that people always need to do. So so that screening, those things that I listed, I would do the same with them as I would with a 1500 metre runner, as I would for a half marathon runner, because I need to know what their fundamental movement is like first, and what their strength capacity is like, to be able to then introduce some stuff that maybe is a bit more advanced, maybe is a bit more sort of explosive stuff, or plyometrics and whatnot. But you wouldn't obviously be able to do that until you know a little bit more about the athlete anyhow.
But so for you still prioritise it the same the longer you went. So a marathon runner, half marathon compared to middle distance, you still think just as important.
Strength in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So a marathon runner should, whether an 800 metre runner or a marathon runner, there should still be strength training in your training week. Otherwise, you're leaving something out. And you saw in those early studies, right? There's stuff through running economy and injury prevention, underpinning fundamentals of being able to train and train harder. Okay, so if you're leaving something like that out, doesn't matter what distance you're training for, it's offering some real value, I think.
Can I add a little bit to that? Hopefully, it adds to what Lee has said. One of the differentiating factors about really good marathon runners is they're really efficient, and it's an event that's about running economy almost, and as Lee said, the strength is part of that running economy. And it's almost,
And
you could argue it's almost more important.
Yeah, and,
And
I should probably clarify, on the running economy, so I talked about the fuel consumption, but there is also the sort of biomechanics. I know, I was like, oh bugger, I didn't really talk about biomechanics. He said, oh, he's going to talk about it in a minute, and I didn't talk about it, but biomechanics, if you think about the running and how the running action and the skill of running, if you've got, I did at least talk about, if you drop and you've got poor control and there's sort of wasted movement. So there's economy in terms of efficiency of movement. There's also efficiency of fuel supply. So, but most of those studies were talking, where they were looking at the fuel consumption, the oxygen, if you like, consumption. They were using up more, so they weren't as economical. And once they'd done the strength work, they were a little bit more economical. And that's a really key part of being an aerobic animal for distance events. So, yeah, but both sides of it are important, because if we're going back to that chassis analogy, if you've got weak chassis and your biomechanics are really bad because you're weak in the hip and you've got poor tight ankles and all those sort of things, you can't put a V8 in a Skoda, can you? It's, maybe you can now, they're quite good cars, aren't they? Yeah. Cool. So yeah, was there any other things? Cool, well thank you very much. Hope we didn't bore you too much.
Thank you.